Good afternoon and morning for our friends in the Eastern Time Zone. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today, Student Learning Live Roundtable on Virtual Community Building and Learning. Today's webinar is sponsored by the GLACUHO Student Learning Committee. I'm Jeremy Alexander. I'm the Technology Coordinator and I'm hosted at Eastern Illinois University, and I'll serve as the moderator for today's webinar. Before we begin the webinar, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items with you to maximize your learning for this session. To ask questions, use the Q&A section. The presenters will answer the questions as quickly as possible, but we want to ensure that there is enough time to cover all the materials. Should you experience any kind of technical problems, please type in the chat box and we'll work to assist you. At the end of the session, the presentation and the recording will be available on the GLACUHO website, glacuho.org, under the Webinar Archives resource for your future reference. We encourage you to share this resource with your colleagues who weren't able to attend. Now I'll hand it over to Emily and Jess from the GLACUHO Student Learning Committee to get us started with today's presentation.
Hello, folks, and welcome. My name is Jess Hoopengardner. I'm a first-year master's student at Indiana University Bloomington. At IUB, I work as a graduate supervisor for diversity education within our residence halls.
And hello, everyone. My name is Emily Brott. I'm a residence coordinator at IUPUI in Indianapolis. I'll be supporting Jess today as she facilitates our conversation by facilitating the slide sharing. So we're going to listen to Jess, turn it over to her as she begins.
Okay, so to get started, we want to cover some expectations for the webinar space. We're really thinking about this as a virtual roundtable, so we want to hear what you all have to say. We're not going to say that we are the experts on virtual community building or virtual student learning, so we want to hear what everyone has been implementing on their own campuses. So to ask questions, you can submit questions using the bar at the bottom of your screen. We do have some prepared, but we'll rely on the group once the conversation gets going. And then we will monitor those questions and pose them to the group. For providing responses once we do ask a question, there is a raise hand feature, and I can call on you so you can contribute. When speaking, just begin by sharing a little bit about yourself, as like your name, your pronouns, position, and what campus you're on. So to get started, we can head to our first set of questions while we wait for some questions to come in. So starting off, thinking about what has been your departmental philosophy on engaging with students that are no longer on campus, and what are some of the roles of housing professionals in ongoing community development and when campuses are experiencing this limited capacity.
It does sound like maybe Jess is cut out there for a second. So we'll continue to monitor the raise hand feature. And I see that Lloyd is sharing, has raised his hand. So I'll go ahead and unmute Lloyd. Sorry, Royd is not your name.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, Emily. Hi, Jess. Thank you so much for facilitating this. This is awesome. And this is Lloyd Graham. I am a assistant director for residential life at Indiana University Bloomington. He, him, his, and I work actually directly with Jess Hoopengardner. I would say in terms of philosophy and role in general at IUB, kind of similar to a lot of other institutions, we're adhering to social distancing. We have maybe around 300 or so undergraduate students, including our student staff, that are still on campus, which in general, we typically have around like 12,000 folks that would be on campus with us. Around 8,000 of those would be first year students. And so with regard to those who are still on campus, making sure that we're promoting a safe and welcoming environment. And so like our on-call structure has adapted to kind of guidelines related to social distancing, just all things COVID-19. But when it comes to kind of a virtual connection piece, we're still making sense of that and we're still working it out. I would say right now we have been doing a lot of tinkering with virtual office hours / desks. So for a good maybe like 10-day period, we had the opportunity for students who are still here to interact with virtual desks, because all of our desks, which would be around maybe like 13 in total, have closed with the exception of one. And so we gave the opportunity for people to kind of use Zoom to ask any questions that they had at our virtual desks. We didn't get a lot of people that joined us there, but just today we sent out an email to residents letting them know that we're starting virtual Residence Life office hours, where we want to connect with them and check in with them. We have a student engagement plan specific to our learning goals for our residential curriculum, where we're going to engage them in questions about how they're doing, how they're making sense of things as it pertains to well-being, intellectual engagement, understanding self and others, and then civic stewardship. And so we have sent out a message to all of those students, whether they're still living on campus or not, to connect with us for like 5 to 10 minutes, but then also if they have any questions for us, they can ask that too.
Thank you, Lloyd. I think you offer some interesting perspectives there related to engaging virtually with students that are off campus, and then also continuing to provide support for those that are. And it sounds like your department's moving forward with engagement of some kind with the students that live with us or have lived with us is still a priority, which I feel like is, why we have this webinar, is to engage in space with that. And I think it's also important to acknowledge that there are some campuses who have chosen and identified that maybe that is not their priority at the moment. But that effort and that value is really appreciated. Would anyone else like to share any thoughts about department philosophies? I see, is Katie Benson? Let's see if I can unmute you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yay, hi. So my name is Katie Benson. I am a first-year grad student in the HESA program at Indiana University. I'm currently working as an assistant community director at Butler University in one of their 2 first-year housing communities. My pronouns are she, her, hers. In terms of not so much the philosophy, more so the role and what we're trying to do, and what I know at least has been working well in our areas. I know that many of our staff use GroupMe's, and so that was really helpful when we were starting to kind of process how we were going to get students in and off campus so that we could start practicing social distancing a little bit better, while also facilitating those students who were going home. Utilizing our staff members and their GroupMe's that they have with their residents was very useful. And I know personally for me, that's something that going forward we're working on. So I know that I'm utilizing our GroupMe's to make sure that these staff still feel connected, that they understand what's going on, how they can still reach out to their residents, because they were concerned about losing that connection with their residents. With everything that's happened and with students no longer being on campus, they still wanted to have opportunities to have those relationships. We're also utilizing Zoom to start getting some meetings going, especially for looking forward to staff members that will be joining us next year. So we've already gone through our staff selections. So we're working right now in our area to start those conversations of, let's review what's gone on this year, what worked well, what didn't work well, and then move into, here are our new staff members, here are returners. Let's start working through any questions that you might have, so that way they don't feel like we're kind of leaving them hanging until August.
Yeah, you brought up 2 interesting points that stand out to me there. The idea of connecting, maybe engagement for the population that is here or no longer here this year, this semester is low, but there's still potential to increase engagement and excitement around what's coming next. And so that is a good use of our engagement strategies, I think, at this point. And I think you also highlight the ability to use existing platforms such as GroupMe or other communication strategies that you might have been using that wouldn't change the way that we communicate or engage, but just we would rely on it in a different way than we might have a few weeks ago. Other thoughts on departmental philosophies that are guiding thoughtful engagement with students at this point? What have you thought about or considered in your own experiences about the role of housing professionals in ongoing community development, especially considering students may not be on campus currently? I see Zach, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and speak.
All right, hello folks, I'm Zach Sandoval. I am a first-year graduate student, Res Hall Director at Eastern Illinois University. I'm also on the Student Staff Learning Committee, so hello friends. My pronouns are he, him, his. The role that I have seen for housing professionals with community development, I've noticed, well, I only have 4 staff in my building, but 2 returned. We made housing optional for students if they needed, or like if it was essential for them to come back, then they could, but otherwise we had them stay back home. But I've noticed with the few residents that are in the building and the few student staff, I've seen that they can be really down lately, especially with the social distancing and the very social students kind of being secluded in the rooms and just being stuck doing homework or online work has been draining for them. So I found my role recently being more of like an uplifter and kind of like a checking in person to make sure that they're doing okay, because it's kind of easy for them to fall in like a depressive state. So whether that be getting a meal with them, going to pick up a takeout meal on campus, or kind of just calling them or emailing them to check in on them, I found that being my role and the role of my peers as well, other graduate students. So thank you.
Thanks, Zach. I think from there you get the sense of, yeah, maybe our role has shifted a little bit and that support is maybe more important now than ever. And also acknowledges maybe the changing nature of what we would support. Maybe our priorities for learning and community engagement would be a little bit different now than they were, especially considering those mental health impacts of the social distancing and things like you mentioned. Anyone else on the thoughts of the role of the housing department and housing professionals in supporting community development and the priorities that we have at this point? All right, and as a reminder, if anything that anyone says sparks any further questions, you can go ahead and shoot those into the chat box, the question box, and Jeremy will go ahead and shout those out for us. Moving a little bit into the similar questions, but related to student staff, who we have a little bit more high touch points with, maybe relying on us or had been relying on us versus some support related to finances. What expectations has your department put in place, similar department philosophies, around student staff and the way that they're engaging specifically with residents who are still or have been residents with us for the year? And I see Lloyd's hand.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So expectation-wise for student staff specifically, so we have 2 primary student staff positions, resident assistants and then community educators, which I'm sure you're familiar with resident assistants. Community educators focus more on facilitating experiences about and across difference in a lot of different ways. So they may have bulletin boards or one-on-one engagement or workshops that they put on related to identity for the most part. We kind of adapted their work agreement to adhere to 5 hours a week, whether they're still here on campus or working remotely. And the vast majority of them are working remotely. And that is a change from their 20-hour a week role. And so we kind of created 2 job expectation documents, one for resident assistants and one for community educators. The resident assistants focus is just kind of that connection piece that several folks have mentioned already. to make sure that we are reaching out to see how people are doing, trying to create virtual spaces of kind of whether it be interaction that is lighthearted or fun, but a big focus is really to see if there's any kind of care situations that we need to follow up on, where students may not be doing well, whether it be like from a intellectual or emotional or kind of financial perspective. With the transition to like online learning, like we all have different learning styles, and so people may be impacted in different ways. But then also at the same time, the idea of not being on campus and being wherever you're at, that could be home, that could be in a different place that you weren't planning on being, and having to engage in relationships that may not be the best for your mental health. Like those are other factors. And then just the financial piece of maybe not having enough to make ends meet, or just something different than what you're used to. All of those kind of things are specific to the resident assistant role, and doing that largely through group means. But again, we are having a very kind of like sticking to 5 hours specific kind of experience. Regardless if a student staff member wants to continue in their role or not, they will continue to receive their stipend. We're still working through reimbursement for different things like their meal plan in their room. But we are not having kind of like very staunch and strict expectations, in the sense that if any student staff member wants to step away or limit even the 5 hours, we're open to that as well. So we're trying to accommodate them while we also reach out to residents, and the community educators are in the same boat as well. Their focus for that 5 hours a week is more so on still facilitating those experiences about and across difference. It's more so it may look like a podcast or a playlist that they've created, or an infographic that they're sharing that relate to identity specific things that can relate to COVID-19. But we also want to be mindful that all things COVID-19 is a lot of our reality thus far. And so offering different opportunities for people to maybe think about other things outside of that would be beneficial too.
Thank you for that, Lloyd. For some context for other folks, I work with the community education program at IU, so I know that our community educators have been working very hard on some infographics for some of the residents to continue that student learning. They know that students are very tired of Zoom, so they're probably not going to use some sort of Zoom webinar, but try to engage folks in other ways. So they've definitely been thinking about what a virtual learning space could offer. So thank you for adding on to that, Lloyd. Do we have anyone else who would like to touch on what their expectations for student, staff, and community development has been? Okay, at this point, I'm seeing no hands, so we can move on, but if anything comes to mind, you can either pop it in the chat or raise your hand again. So kind of moving on to the next question, is there a priority on continued development or a learning space for student, staff, and what does that look like on your campus?
Jess, I'll go ahead and jump in and share something that we're doing that's been kind of enjoyable. So for our RAs, they had the option to stay on campus if that was what was best for them, and contribute to a very similar light structured experience on campus, or they could choose to move off. But if they moved off, they got enrolled in a 4-week like short development course which is a good test drive for an upcoming RA class that we're working through. But that's been a really positive way to see their thoughts and engage with one another across their individualized communities, but then also with the staff members. So we've got like some touch points about how they're doing. And so we organize some different developmental moments around the main aspects of their role, like community management and administrative tasks, and then some peer educator stuff. And we've rolled out modules for that each week, and then they're adding to it. And that's been really unexpectedly positive, and I feel like is a good service to the student staff. So while that work may not be work in the same way that they might experience when they're on campus, they're still benefiting, they're still getting a lot of that processing and value of what they would want from the RA role when they move on to start speaking about what they learned from it. So that has been something that IUPUI has done positively.
Thank you for sharing, Emily. That sounds like a great way to engage student staff members, definitely. I'm still not seeing any other hands. So if we want to move on to the next slide, we can always come back to these questions if things pop up for any of the attendees or panelists. So we can move on. So thinking about kind of more of the details of engaging students, what platforms are you using to engage with students? We've heard about Zoom, we've heard about GroupMe, thinking about more modules. What platforms have been useful that we've not touched on yet? I see Katie, so if you want to unmute yourself.
I am currently doing practicum work at IUPUI with the School of Science Preps office, and we are utilizing Zoom to kind of do a series of webinars for a variety of topics. We just did one recently on interviewing for an internship program that is getting ready to start their interviews. But in addition to those Zoom webinars that we're hosting, we're also utilizing the Canvas pages that the Preps office already has going, and making sure that we're referencing back, we're uploading new material to those platforms, so that way we know that students are currently using those for their classes. They're also still having additional resources and opportunities to engage via that as well.
Thank you for sharing, Katie. It sounds like those Canvas pages may have already existed before the move to like virtual courses. So it's always good to use something that students are already familiar with. That way they can continue their learning on their own. So thank you for sharing, definitely. Do we have any other hands on what platforms have been useful, or maybe not even platforms that you've used yet, but platforms that you're thinking about using in the future? Okay, Katie.
Another kind of platform we're looking, or at least I'm looking into kind of as students, for graduating students at least, to hopefully get them to engage with, is looking at professional groups or associations. So I know that Facebook actually is really great for those professional associations to kind of really encourage and help foster that networking component. So that's something that we're researching right now, as well as looking at professional sites. So looking how to engage more with LinkedIn. So just really capitalizing on the fact that we are in more of a virtual setting right now, and students are going to have to kind of shift how they would go about that job search. So exploring those types of platforms to kind of really effectively and efficiently provide students ways to still go about the job search, but understanding that there's this new virtual component to it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I think that all aspects of social media, you touched on more of the professional networking side, but there's so much you can do with social media with that.
We have a question from Lloyd. He wanted to know how people are accommodating students slash residents in general.
So we have a request to rephrase the question. So I can attempt to rephrase it, or Lloyd, you can jump in to rephrase your question if you'd like to.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, the question is just pertaining to, I mean, at the forefront of my mind is financially speaking. So like, how have we accommodated students who may not be living with us anymore, and kind of their housing contract or accommodations that are being made with, let's say, their meal plan or online learning accommodations that are potentially being made, kind of all the different ways that different institutions have navigated this new reality and accommodations that are being made. And I guess this would also include student staff as well.
I'll jump in. This is Jeremy from EIU. Our governor has us on a shelter-in-place order until the end of the month. It was extended from April 7th. When we were going into this, we extended our spring break with every intention of possibly opening back up. When that big reality sunk in that we weren't going to open up, the institution had transitioned to that it was going to be an all online offering for all courses, and then trying to figure out ways of supporting those that are incapable of being presented all online, i.e. art, laboratory type classes. I can't speak to a great deal of how they've done the accommodation for those, but for our residential students, we were able to process refunds for our students based on the time that they were no longer going to be allowed to return to their on-campus residences. And we are actually processing through now, yesterday and today, the distribution of those refunds per that date. But those who have elected to return will continue to try to provide a level of service for them in their current accommodations, and still have afforded the opportunity for students who were who left for spring break, who needed their educational materials, to be able to come and pick up those said items in preparations for classes to begin.
Thank you for sharing, Jeremy. Does anyone else want to touch on how you are accommodating residents and students, whether they are no longer on campus or still on your campus?
I can jump in quick with some observations that I haven't been directly involved in, but know a lot of people have been working on my campus regarding meals, and still ensuring that those who were food insecure prior to this are still receiving the support needed, especially considering the now even lower amount of resources around that are still open for them to utilize to get food on campus. And so we have a pantry on campus for students, and that was operating, and it's since shifted its operation. But I think it also calls to mind the idea of maybe we did not, as far as accommodating this type of shift, there may not have been plans for all aspects of campus life You know, there's a lot of resources quickly about how to move a course online, and a little less resources quickly about some of the other aspects of supporting the student holistically so they can succeed academically. So that's just an observation about future plans for better accommodations in the face of crisis.
I see another hand. Katie, if you would like to go.
Just kind of add on to resources. So a big resource at Butler's campus is their health services. A lot of students utilize that for mental health purposes, for counseling, for certain prescriptions. And there was a big concern when everything started happening that students weren't going to have access to these, that they were going to have difficulties managing it when they were at home. And so the health service department has worked very diligently to make sure that they are still accessible and open to students. So they have switched to virtual hours. They are also still mailing prescriptions to students that are in need of them, so that way they don't lose that.
Thank you for sharing, Katie. It's good to hear about other services that are on campus that are being accommodating to students who may no longer have direct access to them. Would anyone else like to share on accommodations that their campuses have been doing, whether it's specifically within the housing department or maybe outside of the housing department? Lloyd.
Hello. So kind of going off of the accommodations and kind of the training piece for staff too, there's several things that we've been trying to navigate the best that we can with regard to, so when this all started, we were beginning spring break and our students were leaving and we had no idea about the stay-at-home orders being in effect during this time. And so the hope was that they would come back and, if needed to, move their things out then. But because of the stay-at-home order that's at least until effect until around April 20th, for us, if it's not extended, we have halted kind of the process for students to come back and move their things out. So most of their things are still here, and they may have packages and things that still are here. And so with that, trying to accommodate needing essential items. So that could be medication, that could be any kind of academic things. We have Jacobs School of Music here, which is pretty prestigious. And so students need instruments. And we've accommodated that by sending those essential items to residents. And so there's been training related to that for staff, literally kind of like navigating UPS and creating shipping labels and like boxing items up. Boxing / packaging and shipping instruments is very involved. And so I have learned a thing or two about using a third party to do that as opposed to doing it ourselves, because that is a huge liability. And so that's been a part of that training piece, but also accommodation. But then also just kind of accommodating that kind of customer service and adapting ourselves to the virtual environment has meant training with regard to Zoom. And so what I was mentioning before about creating kind of residence life office hours, there's been some training in relationship to how to navigate Zoom. But that's kind of a reality for most of the things that we're doing, that we need to have be more well-versed when it comes to Zoom in general.
Thank you for adding on a little bit more context to the IU situation, Lloyd. Would anyone else like to touch on accommodations? If not, we can move on to a different question. Looks like no hands, so we can move on to maybe a little bit more fun question. What are some creative ways that you're doing staff bonding right now? Okay, I see a hand, and I apologize. I don't see multiple hands. Quiana, if I apologize if I mispronounced that.
It's okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep. This is Kiana Stone. I'm at DePaul University in residential education. So we were in a unique situation where we had a couple of vacancies for our resident directors. And in that window, we also had a departing staff member. And so typically we do a celebration. We go to one of the nearby restaurants and get pizza and appetizers so campus partners and, our staff can celebrate, the transition of the outgoing staff member and, have an opportunity to, wish them well. And so unfortunately that didn't get to happen. So one of the things we did for our outgoing staff member, we had a virtual lunch to celebrate their last day. Our department ordered food to be delivered to that staff member, to that RD, so that he could have lunch. And then everyone else had their own lunch. And then we did kind of positive affirmations, and, our director had kind of went around, everybody took turns, and, our director moderated, and everyone kind of went around and shared a fond memory or, something fun. So like a positive roast, if you will, for that departing staff member. So that tradition wouldn't be lost. We also usually do a frame where with either a special quote from our institution or a picture collage. And so we were already in progress of completing that. So we were able to complete that and left it in a safe location in our office suite, because we're all working remote, for that staff member to go in and then pick up later that day. Everyone had an opportunity to sign it, and then it was Lysol and sanitized and, left for them. But that was one way that we were able to still kind of maintain that tradition. And then we have an incoming staff member that was recently hired and moved in last week. And so we're doing a virtual welcome lunch for that person because it's unfortunate. By now, they would have engaged with several of the staff members in person. And so we're also moving to do some virtual, the virtual onboarding, so that they're still getting that FaceTime with each of our staff members and, just kind of working through that transition as they just moved in a week or so ago, and they start their onboarding with us next week. So that's all kind of being virtual. So we're trying to make that fun. To connect with the staff. So at the staff level, that's some things that we're doing. And then with our students, we are working, doing virtual programming. We're working with some of our campus partners. There's some vendors out there that will ship things directly to students. For example, we just had our dance marathon event, and they did a virtual couple hour event. Usually it's a 24-hour event. So they did a virtual event last night, and part of that includes t-shirts. And so there's a vendor that was able to ship the t-shirts directly to each of the students that had registered for the event. And so we're looking into working with similar vendors around that, or how we can order things and then have the drop off to the student if it's something that's going to be more hands-on, and then our staff will then facilitate virtually with the remaining residents that are on campus.
Thank you for sharing, Kiana. All of those sound like super cute, super creative ways to continue on traditions that you've already had. So I'm glad that you were able to continue those in a virtual way. I see another hand, Zach Jacobs, if you'd like to go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So just looking at our institution, we did let our student staff go around March 15th, I think was the date, when we originally kind of ordered remote learning, at least for 2 weeks. We just didn't require them to stay on just since they were students and we didn't want to put their health at risk, et cetera. So what we didn't know then was that we would extend that to the rest of the semester. So we don't have any student staff on campus doing the work at all. We do have a few students that stayed with us just because this was the better option in terms of their housing. So we do have them around, but we're not asking them to do anything as part of their original position. So what that's kind of made it sad for is that we're not able to do our culminating experience. I think is what we are calling it. So we've had some discussions a few mornings now just about how we're going to have those kinds of experiences. A couple of staffs here locally. Sorry, I never said where I was from. My name is Zach Jacobs. I'm from Grand Valley State University. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm a Living Center director. And so some staffs kind of anticipated that there would be a lengthy remote learning time. So they were able to have some really good experiences and have some bonding. My staff did not. I think I was very much in the attitude of, I will see you in 2 weeks, and I'm very hopeful that I'll see you in 2 weeks. So we're actually meeting tonight just over Zoom just to say hey, but I'm trying to plan a more meaningful bonding experience to give the seniors an opportunity to say bye and the returning staff members to kind of start planning for next year as well. So it's, it varies by community, and we have 12 different staffs here. So each Living Center director is going to tackle it with a different lens, but it kind of, one of my traditions with our staff, very similar to what Kiana said, is doing like a framed photo. We always did a celebration at our alumni house, which is very picturesque. So we would take our staff photos, and then I would run to Meyer that night, get them printed, framed, so I could hand them off, because usually the next day was the very last day of closing. So I can't necessarily do that. Luckily, I do have a couple of really good pictures with them that I can frame and just mail to them. But it does kind of, it is kind of a bummer not to be able to be with them and share in that experience in person. But luckily, Zoom exists and everybody has access to it on my staff as they're able to. So I hope to see their faces soon.
Thank you for sharing, Zach. You touched on some points that I think we'll get to in the next question of thinking about how at this time of the year closure is so important. So how are you making this happen online? If anyone else would like to share. I know Zach touched a little bit on some of the problems and things that he's been thinking through. Zach again.
Oh no. Yeah, so sorry, I didn't touch on plans yet. But I think something that has been successful is just some remote games, things like that, to make it really fun for them. So I know Jackbox games are really fun from a distance. I'm still trying to work out some other game opportunities. I try to play with my friends over Zoom too. Just so that we're still able to have that fun time. And we're not just, it doesn't feel too agenda-like we're moving down a list of items and then we close out without any real meaningful sharing. So hopefully we can do some activities like that. There are so many staff bonding activities that I'm trying to think of how you would transition to online. Because one that I really wanted to do was we did with our larger staff was kind of, stand under someone's name who has done X or something like that, or, tap somebody on the shoulder that you feel has, you know, influenced your year, or like has made you smile in the last 2 weeks, something like that. So I'm trying to think of ways to connect that online so we can still have some really great catharsis, I guess. But I'm not sure how to do that yet. So sorry, there's no real answer here.
No, don't be sorry that you don't have a good answer. I know that for our student staff members, normally at each meeting we do kudos, where throughout the week they write down a little note to someone else, and then we pass them all around and read them off one by one. They're just notes of affirmation, but without the basket for kudos, we're trying to figure out exactly how we're going to utilize that for next week's meeting, because we definitely know that student staff members want some words of affirmation and having that closure for the semester, but we're so used to doing that a certain way that I know that I'm trying to figure out, is there even a software that we could have instead of, you know, passing the little bucket around with the words of affirmation? So there's definitely some mental transitioning going on.
And for me, Jess and Zach, that sparked a reminder that we are relying a lot on online and virtual things, but there's still space to do some of those more tangible things once the world settles down just a bit. I think one of the plans we have is to send notes and cards to the graduating senior staff in the department so that they're still able to get some of that appreciation that may have come in person, but now will just come to their mailbox. And that might, because it's tangible, feel a little bit more special even than an email. So we're excited about that.
That sounds like a great idea, Emily, and I may have to borrow that for some of our graduating seniors. So does anyone else have anything they would like to touch on dealing with creative ways for staff bonding or closure at the end of the semester? Okay, I see no hands. So we can talk a little bit about what has been challenging in terms of really either staff bonding, virtual community building, what virtual learning looks like for your residents. Whatever you're struggling with, we can use these last 10 minutes to think about some things that we've all been working through. Or if you have any other questions. Zach.
Hi again. So something I was typing out as a question to propose or to pose to the group. Something that I'm struggling with, not necessarily now because it has passed, but I know some other folks on my staff are, is we still do have a conduct process that we're going through. And I apologize if it was touched on earlier. I did have to step out for a moment. And something that has been kind of a struggle with handling conduct is, how are you able to do restorative justice while also acknowledging the pandemic, while acknowledging just how much people's lives have been uplifted if they had to go home, if they're still on campus but they don't have their friends, their support system here, etc. That was something I really struggled with because I had 4 conduct meetings last week. And I had to take a whole different tone, a whole different approach, because I wanted to make sure the students felt supported, and in their own situations, as well as like learning from the situation. And I think some of it just feels natural to me to say, okay, yeah, some of this has to go out the window, because I'm like, you are no longer here on campus with us, which means our policies are not in place for you at home. The law is, but our policies are not. You will not be returning other than to retrieve your items unless you already completely moved out. And so what does that look like going forward? What education is necessary, et cetera? Because, some of it is, we, in those meetings, we're like, yeah, you'll still be with us for the next 2 months. And we want to make sure you understand the policy. Yeah, we still want you to understand the policy, but you're no longer here. And you're stressed. I'm also stressed. So just curious how those conversations are going for everyone else, because it has been difficult here.
So if anyone has any responses to Zach and his conduct question, you can raise your hand and we can carry on that conversation. Yes, Lloyd?
I really don't have much to add to what Zach said. I would completely agree. I think people are challenged by this new reality in the context of having a student conduct meeting or engaging with students in the same way that we were trying to before. It also makes me think about like the role of education within this environment, this new reality that we're in, specifically in the context of residential curriculum. And so like with a conduct meeting, that's a great opportunity to engage in a way that can still happen virtually, but it's just a different feel. And there's kind of some new challenges that are presented with that. And so my challenge has been like, to what extent are we kind of navigating this environment? And it's not an either or, but navigating this new reality from this kind of customer service, checking in, seeing how people are, trying to stay connected perspective, but then also like not kind of losing the education that exists. But then like, I believe true and transformative education comes from that relationship building. And so like when we're not able to build authentic or I won't say authentic, but as meaningful relationships as we once have, because there's such an emphasis on kind of the social distancing and kind of virtual opportunities now, like education is going to look different, obviously, but within the residential environment, how can we still focus on education, but then not neglect kind of the reality of things with regard to needs of people, to be honest with you.
I think that there's some valid points, Lloyd. It's definitely been interesting trying to figure out where that is of the world is very stressful right now, but this be a learning opportunity so that my student staff members are still wanting to engage students in some tough conversations, but that now may not be a great time to have tough conversations with to challenge learning. So it's definitely been an interesting balance. We have just a few minutes left where if anyone else has comments for Zach's question dealing with conduct or any last questions for the group, Yes, Mary. If you want to mute yourself, Mary.
Mary, if you're having problems unmuting yourself, if you go ahead and type your comment in the chat box or in the questions box, I'll go ahead and get it read for you. Mary has left. It's back over to you, Jess.
Okay. Lloyd, I see your hand, and then if Mary's question pops up, we can put that in too. So Lloyd, if you would like to go.
Yeah, not a question. Just wanted to express gratitude and appreciation for this space being offered up for folks. I think it's a great idea, and I appreciate y'all facilitating. Jeff and Emily and Jeremy. Y'all are some wonderful people I know personally. So, you know, for those who don't know them, you're missing out. So thank you again for offering this space. And I encourage us to offer up spaces like this again in the future to get more people a part of the conversation, because I think it's a really good conversation to have.
Well, thank you for that, Lloyd. That is something that the Student Learning Committee wants to do. Is we would like to have monthly webinars like this where we can have some roundtable discussions virtually, whether it is more about COVID-19 or maybe something that we would consider a little bit more normal for our everyday lives. So we're definitely looking into doing that and continuing this Student Learning Live Roundtable series. When we send out the slides from this conversation, Emily, if you want to go to the next slide, we will compile resources and add them to this presentation. So you will have all of the resources that we have compiled, as well as I've been taking notes. So I will put down some of the ideas that everyone has been sharing and some of the questions that were brought up so you can continue the conversations on your campuses. Emily, do you have anything else to add?
I do not. Thanks so much.
All right.
Thank you for attending, everyone.
All right. With that said, again, thank you everyone taking an hour of your day to talk with us. The slides will be available on the GLACUHO website. There will also be a feedback survey sent shortly. So please give us feedback, as well as take care of yourselves, take care of those in your charge, and have a great weekend. Goodbye.
Bye.